My name is Rachel, and I never imagined I'd be writing this kind of story. For most of my life, I believed in doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. I wasn't raised rich or powerful. I was raised kind. I believed kindness always came back around. That life, in its own strange way, balanced the scales. So, when my mother-in-law, Margaret, fell sick and no one else stepped up, I didn't think twice. I packed my things, left my job at the small bakery I loved, and moved in with her. She had a sharp tongue and an even sharper mind once, but the illness changed her. There were days she didn't recognize herself in the mirror. Days she screamed at shadows. Days she called me by her daughter's name, Carla, who hadn't visited in months. I fed her, bathed her, sat by her side when she forgot where she was or thought she was still a young girl on a farm in Iowa. I held her hand when the nights got long, and she cried for her husband, who'd passed years before. I did all this not because anyone asked me to. Certainly not her kids. They were ghosts, popping in once a year on holidays with store-bought cookies and fake smiles. No, I did it because I loved her. Because she was family. Because I thought, maybe if I gave her my best, her children would see and follow. I was wrong. 10 years. 10 years of wiping her tears, feeding her soft foods, singing to her when she was too weak to speak. I lost friends. I lost opportunities. I lost myself sometimes. But I never complained, because I thought I had a place in her heart and that maybe, just maybe, she'd left me a place in her will. She died peacefully on a Tuesday morning, holding my hand. I had just read her a chapter from her favorite book. The sun had barely risen. And when the doctor confirmed what I already knew in my heart, I kissed her forehead and whispered, "Thank you for letting me love you." That same afternoon, her children showed up like sharks circling blood. Within days, the house was emptied. Margaret's jewelry, her savings, her family heirlooms, all gone. Carla, David, and Beth, her 3 children, split everything down the middle. They didn't even look at me. They moved fast like I was just some maid they were done paying. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't say, "Thank you." They said I could stay in the guest room for a little while until I figured something out. That was their only gift to me. I wasn't on the deed. I wasn't on the will. And when I asked about it, they just shrugged. Carla even had the nerve to say, "Mom probably forgot. Or maybe she thought we'd take care of you." And just like that, everything was gone. But 2 weeks later, as I packed my last suitcase and stared at the bare walls that once held photos of us together, of her laughing, of us gardening, of me holding her when she cried, I found something. It was in the attic, stuffed behind a box of Christmas ornaments. An old wooden box, dusty and almost hidden. Inside was a letter. It was addressed to me. My hands shook as I opened it. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting shaky, but still clearly hers. And what she wrote changed everything. I'll never forget the first time I met Margaret. It was during Thanksgiving, years ago. I was just dating her son, Andrew, back then. He passed away 3 years into our marriage. Car crash. Quick. Clean. No pain, the doctor said. He was on his way home from work. 1 minute there, the next minute gone. Margaret and I bonded through that pain. I stayed close, not just because I had nowhere else to go, but because she became like a second mother to me. She had this fierce way of loving, sharp around the edges, but warm underneath. I think, in some strange way, losing Andrew pulled us together, like glue. When her health started to go downhill, it was like watching a fire burn itself out. Little by little, the woman I knew started fading. And little by little, I stepped in to fill the gaps. At first, it was simple things, reminding her of appointments, helping her sort medications, cooking meals. But then it got worse. There were hospital visits, late-night emergency calls, moments where she forgot how to use the bathroom, how to feed herself. I quit my job to take care of her full-time. I gave up my apartment. My world shrank to the 4 walls of that house, and the woman lying in the bed. I missed weddings, birthdays, funerals. My own mother passed while I was caring for Margaret, and I couldn't even make the trip to her grave. I told myself Margaret needed me more. And now, standing in that dusty attic, With her letter in my hand, I realized I might not have been as invisible to her as her children made me feel. The letter said, "My sweet Rachel, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you're probably still wiping your tears like you always do when you think no one's watching. I know I was hard on you sometimes. I know I wasn't always kind. But you were the only one who stayed. You didn't run.
You didn't pretend.
You held my hand even when I tried to push you away. You gave me dignity in my final years. You made me feel like I mattered. I need you to know that I saw everything. And I didn't forget you. Not even once. Go to the sewing room. Pull back the second drawer. You'll find the next step there." My heart raced. I wiped my face and ran down the creaky stairs, down the hall, and into the sewing room that hadn't been touched since she got too weak to hold a needle. The drawer was stiff, but I managed to pull it open. Inside was a small, navy blue folder with my name written in her shaky script. Inside it were documents, bank statements,
Deeds.
an envelope marked with the name of a lawyer, and a note that simply read, "They took what they could see, but what matters is what they didn't." I didn't know what it meant at first. I stared at the documents, my mind spinning, trying to make sense of it all. And that's when I heard the front door open. Voices. Carla's voice. Then David's. They were back. And they weren't supposed to be. I froze, the folder still in my hands. Carla called out, "Rachel? Are you still here?" I had minutes, maybe seconds, to decide what to do. If they found me with that folder, they'd ask questions. They'd try to take it. I knew them well enough to know that. So I did the only thing I could think of. I hid it. But as I crept out of the sewing room, my foot hit the corner of the old wooden table. A loud crack echoed through the room. The voices downstairs went silent. Then David yelled, "Did you hear that?" Footsteps started coming up the stairs. My heart pounded in my ears as I turned off the light and ducked behind the curtain in the hallway. They were getting closer. And I had nowhere else to run. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the open door at the bottom of the stairs. My breath was shallow. I could feel my pulse in my neck as I pressed my back against the wall, the curtain brushing my cheek. The navy blue folder was tight in my arms, crinkling under my grip. My mind was racing. How much had they seen? Did they know I found something? Carla's voice pierced the silence. "Rachel?" Her footsteps creaked as she climbed the stairs. "Are you still up there? I thought you were leaving today." David was close behind. "She probably forgot something. Or maybe she's just being nosy."
You know how she is.
I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. I couldn't move, not yet. If I made a sound, they'd find me. And if they saw the folder, I didn't want to think about what they'd do. These weren't people who asked questions. They took what they wanted. The footsteps stopped right outside the sewing room. I could hear the soft squeak of the drawer being opened again. "Nothing in here," David muttered. Maybe she was just poking around, trying to find something Mom left behind. Pathetic. I heard Carla laugh. She actually thought Mom would give her anything. Can you believe that? 10 years of playing nurse, and she still ended up with nothing. Well, almost nothing. Their words burned. I knew I shouldn't let them get to me, but hearing it said out loud like that, it cut deep. I had poured everything I had into Margaret's care.
10 years of my life gone.
And, to them, it was a joke. They moved into the hallway, and I held my breath as they passed me. Carla was still talking. "I just came to grab the keys to the lake house. Me and Trevor are going out there this weekend. Might as well enjoy what's ours." "Check the kitchen." "She might have left something behind down there," David said. "You know how these people get. Always taking what doesn't belong to them." I waited until their footsteps faded down the stairs before I moved. My knees were trembling, but I forced myself to keep quiet as I slipped into the guest bedroom and shut the door without a sound. I sat on the edge of the bed, folder in my lap, heart pounding like a drum. Once I was sure they were downstairs, I opened the folder again. The documents inside weren't just bank statements. They were titles.
Bonds.
A trust account in my name. There was even a handwritten letter from a lawyer named Jonathan Marks, dated just a few months ago. Dear Ms. Rachel Adams, as per the instructions of Margaret Elaine Whitmore, I have prepared the legal documents pertaining to your inheritance, held in a separate trust account and property agreement. Mrs. Whitmore instructed that this information be withheld from her children and made accessible only upon specific conditions, which have now been met. Please contact me immediately at the number below to begin the transfer process. Inheritance. She left me something. My eyes filled with tears. After everything, Margaret hadn't forgotten me. She had just been protecting it.
Protecting me.
I clutched the folder to my chest, overwhelmed. It wasn't just about money or property. It was about being seen, being valued. It meant I hadn't been a shadow in the house. I had mattered to her. Even when her memory slipped and her mind wandered, somewhere deep down, she still remembered what I'd done for her. I waited in a room until I heard the front door close again. Carla and David were gone. Then I got to work. I made a copy of everything in the folder, scanned them with my phone, backed them up to the cloud. I even sent a set of documents to an old friend of mine from high school, Jason, who is now a lawyer in Michigan. Just in case. I wasn't going to let this slip away. The next morning, I called Jonathan Marks. He was expecting my call. I'm so sorry for your loss, he said kindly. Margaret spoke about you often. She said you were the best thing that happened to her in the last years of her life. That nearly broke me. I swallowed the lump in my throat and thanked him. She created a private trust for you, he continued. It includes a savings account, some stock investments, and most importantly, a deed to the lake house in Vermont. I blinked. The same lake house her kids just took? He chuckled dryly. They think they did. But legally, the house belongs to you. It was transferred 6 months ago. She anticipated their behavior. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. All I could think of was Margaret, frail and fading, yet still sharp enough to outsmart her own children. Still strong enough to protect me. Can we do anything about them already taking things? I asked. That depends on how far you're willing to go, he said. I didn't answer right away, because deep down I knew I was willing to go as far as it took. The next few days were a blur of planning. I met with Jonathan in person. We drew up legal action to reclaim the lake house and freeze Margaret's accounts until everything was sorted. The letter and documents she left were airtight. Her children might have emptied the house, but they hadn't touched what really mattered. And then, I made the decision to visit the lake house. I drove up that Friday alone, the deed in my glove compartment. The road was familiar. I had gone there once, years ago, before Margaret got sick. She always said it was her favorite place in the world. Said it made her feel like herself again. I was surprised she hadn't sold it, but now I understood why. It was a small wooden house nestled by the edge of the water, surrounded by tall trees and silence. Beautiful, peaceful, and already occupied. Trevor's truck was parked in the driveway. I recognized it from family get-togethers. And through the window, I saw Carla. She was barefoot, wrapped in a blanket, holding a glass of wine, and laughing at something Trevor said. They looked like they didn't have a care in the world. That was about to change. I parked at the end of the driveway, took out the deed, and knocked on the door. Carla answered, blinking at me like I'd just stepped out of a horror movie. Rachel? What the hell are you doing here? I held up the folder. Just coming home. She narrowed her eyes. What? I own this house, I said, my voice calm. Margaret left it to me, along with a few other things. She laughed. Actually laughed. No, you don't. We already took care of all that. You're not even family. That's funny, I said, pulling out the deed and placing it in her hands. Because your mother thought I was. Carla read the paper slowly. Her expression changed from smug to pale. Trevor looked over her shoulder, muttering, What the hell is this? You're trespassing, I added. You have 10 minutes to pack your things. And just like that, the smile dropped off her face. She tried to argue, of course. Said the papers must be fake. Threatened to call the police. So I called them for her. When the officer arrived and saw the paperwork, he looked at Carla with a mixture of pity and amusement. Ma'am, this house belongs to her now, he said, gesturing toward me. She had to leave. Right then and there. I stood on the porch as they packed in silence, stuffing their bags and wine bottles into the truck. Carla didn't look at me. Trevor muttered something under his breath as they drove off. I didn't care. The wind was cold that evening, but I felt nothing but warmth as I stepped into the house. Margaret's lake house. My lake house. I thought that was the end of it. But 3 days later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Margaret's eldest son, David. And what he wrote made my stomach turn. He was challenging the will. And he wasn't doing it alone. I sat at the kitchen table of the lake house, the morning light pouring in through the wide glass windows, bouncing off the surface of the lake like tiny diamonds. It should have felt peaceful, healing, even. Instead, my hands trembled as I held the thick envelope that had arrived in the mail just a few hours ago. The sender was David Whitmore, Margaret's oldest son, the one who always thought he was the smartest person in the room. A corporate lawyer with a trophy wife and a voice like gravel wrapped in arrogance. I hadn't seen him cry once at his mother's funeral. Not once. The letter inside was short, sharp, and soaked in venom. Rachel, it has come to my attention that you've misled my family and unlawfully claimed property that does not belong to you. My siblings and I are in the process of contesting the will and trust associated with Margaret Whitmore. Your time playing house is over. Sincerely, David Whitmore, Esq. No, dear. No regards. Just a threat written in a font too clean to be friendly. I stared at the signature for a long moment, my stomach tightening. They weren't just bitter anymore. They were coming for me. All of them. I picked up my phone and called Jonathan Marks. Rachel, he answered on the first ring. I figured you'd call. You saw it. Already filed a response. But we need to be careful. David has resources. He's trying to argue undue influence, that you manipulated Margaret when she was too ill to make legal decisions. I sat back, stunned. That's not true. She was of sound mind when we met with you. She signed everything. She was clear. She was, Jonathan agreed. But they're going to do everything they can to make her look confused, and you look greedy. I laughed bitterly. They ignored her for years. Barely visited. Didn't even know her favorite book. But I'm the greedy one. Welcome to family law, he said, sighing. A week passed, then another. My days at the lake house were a strange mix of calm and chaos. I'd wake up early, sip coffee on the dock, watch the ducks glide across the water, and then spend the rest of the day gathering paperwork, phone records, witness testimonies. I even called nurses from the hospice service to get written statements about Margaret's mental state in the months before her death. Jonathan warned me the process would be long and ugly. And it was. But I wasn't afraid of a fight. I had already fought for 10 years, through tears, sleepless nights, hospital stays, bed sores, and hallucinations. I had fought for Margaret's dignity when no one else would. I wasn't about to let her memory be dragged through the mud by her own children. Still, some nights, the weight of it all got to me. I'd sit by the fireplace, holding one of Margaret's old scarves, breathing in the faint smell of lavender. I missed her. Not just the version of her that was sharp and witty, but even the broken, tired version I cared for near the end. She had become the center of my world, and now my world was under attack. One night, a week before the court hearing, I got a phone call. It was Beth, the youngest of Margaret's children. The one who'd always hovered between cold and forgettable, like an extra character in a movie that didn't matter to the plot. I hadn't spoken to her since the funeral. Rachel, she said, her voice soft. I'm sorry. I blinked. What? I didn't know about the trust.
Not really.
David just said Mom didn't leave a will, and Carla went along with it. I thought it was true. But now, I saw the documents. I read her letter. You were there. You took care of her. We didn't. I didn't know what to say. My anger was still raw, but the sincerity in her voice gave me pause. I think David's going too far, she continued. He's trying to spin this into some big fraud case, but it's not. You deserve what she left you. Then why didn't you stop them when they were tearing through her house? I asked, sharper than I meant to. Why didn't you speak up?
I was scared, she said.
David controls everything. The money, the decisions. Carla's too proud to push back. But I'm not like them. I waited.
I want to help, she said.
If you'll let me. I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to believe her. The other part remembered how quickly she had looked through Margaret's jewelry box, claiming pieces like it was a garage sale. But something in her tone felt different. Regretful. Then show up, I finally said. Testify. Tell the court the truth. I will. She hung up before I could say anything else. The morning of the court hearing came faster than I expected. The courthouse was small, tucked between an insurance office and a diner, the kind of place that still used paper files and smelled like old coffee. I wore a simple black dress. No makeup. I didn't want to look like someone trying to win a case. I wanted to look like someone who had nothing left to hide. David, Carla, and Beth were already seated when I walked in. David's jaw clenched the moment he saw me. Carla wouldn't even look my way. But Beth gave me a small nod. The judge was an older woman named Judge Patterson. Her eyes were sharp, her voice steady.
She didn't waste time.
David's lawyer started with his argument that Margaret had been mentally compromised, that I had manipulated her in her final years, isolated her, kept her from her children. He used big words like coercion and emotional exploitation. He even brought up the fact that I lived with Margaret rent-free for years. I wanted to scream. I gave up everything to take care of her, but I stayed quiet. Then Jonathan spoke. He brought out the documents, the video recordings of Margaret signing them, the letters she wrote. He read her handwritten note to me out loud in the courtroom. The words echoed across the wooden benches like a prayer. You didn't run. You didn't pretend. You held my hand even when I tried to push you away. And then came Beth. She took the stand, voice shaking, and told the truth. How they had ignored Margaret. How I had been there through everything. How their mother had often spoken about leaving the lake house to me because it was the one place she felt at peace, and she wanted me to have peace too. By the end of her testimony, even Carla looked rattled. David, however, looked ready to explode. This is nonsense, he hissed under his breath. She brainwashed her. Everyone knows it. Judge Patterson looked at him. What I know, Mr. Whitmore, is that your mother made her decisions clearly and legally, and you're upset because you weren't the one in control. David turned red, but he said nothing else. The court ruled in my favor. The trust stood. The lake house was mine. The savings, the stocks, all of it. I walked out of that courthouse not with a smug smile, but with tears in my eyes. Not because I had won, but because Margaret had won. She had protected me, even after death. I thought that was the end of it. I thought they'd go home, lick their wounds, and move on. But I was wrong. 3 nights later, I returned to the lake house from the grocery store. The sky was dark, the wind sharp. The front door was ajar. And when I stepped inside, the entire living room had been torn apart. Drawers pulled out. Cushions slashed. Picture frames smashed on the floor. It wasn't just vandalism. They were looking for something. And as I stood frozen in the doorway, I realized something terrifying. They think there's more. And they're not done with me yet. The room was in chaos. Books flung off shelves, shattered glass sparkling on the hardwood floor. The blanket Margaret had hand-stitched, a quilt she kept folded neatly at the edge of the couch, was ripped down the middle like someone had grabbed it in a frenzy. The vase by the fireplace, the one filled with dried lavender, was tipped over and crushed into dust. I dropped the grocery bag. Apples rolled across the floor unnoticed. My breath caught in my throat. They'd been here. Again. I backed out slowly, scanning for any sign they were still inside. The house was dark, silent except for the soft ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. Nothing stirred, but I knew it in my bones. This wasn't random. They were searching for something. Something they thought Margaret had left behind. I pulled out my phone and called the sheriff. The deputies arrived 20 minutes later, their flashlights sweeping through the torn-apart living room and hallway. I watched from the porch, arms wrapped tightly around myself, as they examined the scene. Looks like forced entry, one of them said. Deadbolts broken from the outside. Any idea who'd want to do this? Another asked. I hesitated. Do I tell them the truth? That I suspect my own in-laws broken? That they'd already tried to challenge the will and failed, and now they were getting desperate? I nodded slowly.
Yeah.
I've got a few names. They took a report, promised to follow up, said someone would be in touch soon. But I'd seen that look in their eyes. The same look people gave me when I told them I spent 10 years caring for my mother-in-law instead of moving on with my life.
Pity.
Disbelief. Dismissal. I spent the rest of the night cleaning up. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I called Jonathan and told him everything. They're looking for something, I said. What could it be? There was silence on the other end of the line, then a low breath. Rachel, there was one thing Margaret mentioned during our last meeting. Something she said she'd leave hidden until the time was right. What kind of thing? She didn't say. Just that if things went south, if her kids ever tried to take more than what was theirs, you'd find what you needed in the one place they'd never look. I frowned. That's not helpful. No, he agreed. But maybe it means something to you. I thought about it the rest of the day. The one place they'd never look. I walked through the lake house again, slower this time, searching for something, anything, that felt out of place. I checked drawers, cabinets, photo frames. Nothing. Then I stepped into the garage. It was mostly storage now. Old gardening tools, broken furniture, and a dusty canoe hanging from the ceiling. I almost turned around when I noticed something odd. The back wall. Half of it was covered in cobwebs and cracked paint. The other half looked newer.
Clean.
Slightly different color. I walked over and tapped on it.
Hollow. My heart jumped.
I pushed hard, and the panel slid open. Behind it was a small compartment, just big enough to hold a metal box. I reached in and pulled it out, heart thudding like a drum. The box was locked, but I knew where Margaret kept her keys. I had kept the little ring of them tucked away in a teacup in the kitchen, one marked with an M in faded paint. It had always hung on the edge of her bedroom mirror. I ran back to the kitchen, grabbed the keys, and within minutes, the lock clicked open. Inside the box were 2 items. One was an envelope, sealed in wax with Margaret's initials. The second was a flash drive. I didn't open the letter yet. My hands were shaking too much. Instead, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop and waited for it to load. There was only one folder. For the day they come back. Inside were dozens of files. Scans of financial documents, bank transfers, legal memos, old voicemails, copies of text messages from Margaret's phone, and one video file labeled Play Me First. I clicked it. The screen lit up with Margaret's face. Older, frilier than I remembered, but her eyes still sharp. Rachel, she said, smiling faintly. If you're watching this, then they've come for you. And you're scared. And I'm so sorry for that. I covered my mouth, already crying. They never cared for me the way you did. Not once. They waited for me to die so they could collect. But I knew them. I knew they wouldn't stop, even when I gave you what I did. So I made sure you'd have proof, real proof, that I made my choices with a clear mind. She leaned in closer to the camera. I recorded everything. Every conversation with them after my diagnosis. Every insult. Every time they asked for money, then disappeared for months. It's all on this drive. And more. She paused, then added, there's also something else. Something they don't know exists. It's not just about what I gave you, Rachel. It's about what they took. She smiled one last time. Use it. Finish this. And live. The video ended. I sat in silence. The documents, dozens of them, were a goldmine. Bank statements showing large transfers Margaret had made to David over the years, gifts disguised as loans he never paid back. Secret recordings of conversations where Carla pressured her to change her will. Voicemails from Beth asking for help, then mocking her when she didn't answer. This wasn't just a family being cruel. It was a family trying to erase her and cover it with greed. I opened the envelope next. Inside was a handwritten note and a second deed. To a property in Oregon. A cottage. In my name. You thought the lake house was all, didn't you? The letter said. But this was mine. The only thing I ever bought for myself. I want you to have it. To start over. Far from them. Let them have the crumbs. You've earned the peace. I couldn't breathe. Another home. Another escape. But I didn't want to run. Not yet. I forwarded the entire contents of the flash drive to Jonathan that night. And the next morning, he filed a restraining order against the Whitmore siblings. All of them. For harassment. For trespassing. For attempted property theft. And the video? He leaked it. To the press. It didn't take long for the media to pick it up. The story of a dying woman whose children tried to rob her blind, only to be stopped by the one person they thought they could walk over. Margaret's face was on the evening news. Not as a fragile old woman, but as a fierce matriarch who left a legacy far more powerful than they ever expected. I thought they'd back off, but I underestimated just how far David would go. 2 nights later, just after midnight, I got another knock on the door. This time, it wasn't Carla. It wasn't Beth. It was a stranger. A man in a suit. He handed me a letter, nodded, and walked away. I opened it under the porch light. It was from a lawyer. A new one. Representing a man claiming to be Margaret's long-lost brother.
He was suing me.
For the entire estate. The letter trembled in my hands as I read it again under the pale porch light, the crickets in the woods falling silent in my ears. A brother? Margaret never once mentioned having a brother. Not during the long nights we stayed up watching old movies. Not during her more lucid days when she'd talk about her childhood or her parents or the cold winters in Iowa. Nothing. But here it was, stamped and signed by a new attorney representing a man named Eli Whitmore, claiming to be Margaret's only living sibling and rightful heir to everything. I sat down hard on the wooden steps of the porch, my legs weak under me. The wind off the lake was sharp that night, stinging my cheeks. I pulled Margaret's old shawl tighter around my shoulders, her scent still faint in the threads. My mind swirled with questions. Was this real? Could it be? Or was this just another desperate move? Another con from the Whitmore siblings, using someone else to try to pry what they couldn't take with force or lies. I didn't sleep that night. By sunrise, I had already called Jonathan and emailed him photos of the letter. I don't believe this for a second, he said as soon as he picked up. If Margaret had a brother, we would have known. The estate planning process is thorough. We ran background checks. Public records. She was an only child. But what if it's true? I asked. What if he was estranged? Then we prove he wasn't entitled to anything. But first, let's figure out if he's even real. Within 48 hours, Jonathan had run a search. Eli Whitmore did exist, but barely. He had a weak online presence, no birth certificate that tied him to Margaret's family, and most suspicious of all, he had recently connected with none other than Carla Whitmore on social media. The message trail wasn't long, but it was damning. Carla Whitmore, she's not blood. You are. If we do this right, it all goes back to family. Eli Whitmore. I'm in. What's the story? Jonathan whistled as he scrolled through the screenshots. Well, there it is. Fabricated heir, brought in to challenge you from a new angle. But now we've got proof of fraud. This is criminal. I stared at the screen. My jaw clenched. It wasn't just about the house anymore. Or the money. Or the will. It was war. Jonathan moved fast. We submitted the new evidence to the judge from the previous case. This time, it wasn't just about defending my inheritance, it was about charging Carla and her siblings with conspiracy to commit fraud. We filed for an emergency injunction to stop Eli from pursuing the estate until the court could review his legitimacy. The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. 2 weeks I had to survive. The media caught wind of the fake brother scandal and ran with it. Greedy siblings fabricate family member in estate war. Caretaker battles on as vicious in-laws attempt one last grab. For once, the public wasn't laughing at me. They were rooting for me. I was flooded with messages of support, strangers telling me they'd watched loved ones die alone, or that they'd been cut out of family legacies because they weren't blood. Some offered to send money. Others shared their own stories of revenge. Quiet, slow, justice that came when no one expected it. It gave me strength. Beth even called again. I had no idea about this Eli guy, she said, voice shaking. I'm done, Rachel. I told David and Carla I was out, and David said I was dead to him. Maybe that's a good thing, I said. She was silent for a while. You were better to our mother than any of us ever were. I know that now. I hope you win. I didn't reply. I didn't need her apologies. I needed justice. The night before the hearing, I stood on the porch of the lake house and looked out over the water. The sky was full of stars, and the wind had softened into a breeze. Somewhere in the woods, an owl called out. I imagined Margaret sitting beside me, bundled in that same shawl, sipping chamomile tea. I could almost hear her voice. Don't let them take your peace, sweetheart. Not after all you've given. The next morning, I stood in court, chin high, as Jonathan laid it all out. The fake brother scheme. The messages between Carla and Eli. The trail of lies. He brought in a genealogist who confirmed Margaret had no known siblings. Then came the final blow. Jonathan played a voicemail, recorded months before her death. It was Margaret's voice, clear and confident. If my kids come crawling back with some fake cousin or uncle, I want it on record. I was an only child. No siblings. No extended family worth remembering. If someone shows up, they're lying. And if they're lying, they're not just disrespecting me. They're spitting on Rachel.
And I won't have that.
The courtroom was silent when the recording ended. The judge leaned forward, eyes like daggers. Ms. Whitmore made her intentions crystal clear. This court finds no evidence that Eli Whitmore is in any way related to Margaret Whitmore. Furthermore, this court finds sufficient grounds to begin an investigation into potential estate fraud, naming Carla Whitmore, David Whitmore, and Eli Whitmore as co-conspirators. David, seated in the back, turned beet red. Carla stood up, mouth open like she might scream. Beth just closed her eyes and exhaled. It was over. This time, really over. I walked out of that courtroom and into the warm light of spring. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted my name. I didn't stop. I just kept walking. Back to the lake house. Back to my peace. The next few months were a blur of paperwork, settlements, and apologies I didn't care to hear. David and Carla were fined. Eli disappeared off the grid. Beth stayed quiet. And me? I finally visited the cottage in Oregon. It was small, sunlit, with wildflowers blooming along the fence and a little swing on the front porch. I found an envelope tucked in the mailbox when I arrived. No stamp, no address, just my name in Margaret's handwriting. Welcome home, sweetheart. You earned this.
You saved me.
Now save yourself. I sat on the porch swing, letter in my lap, tears slipping down my cheeks. I thought about the 10 years of caregiving, the loneliness, the loss, the silence. Then I thought about Margaret's smile, her quiet strength, her final stand. And I smiled, because in the end, kindness hadn't made me weak. It had made me unstoppable.